The number on the bank statement didn't make sense. I sat at my kitchen table, reading it 3 times, then a fourth, the way you reread a sentence when your brain refuses to accept what your eyes are clearly telling it. $43,000. Gone. Not slowly, not in small amounts. I might have missed gone in 11 transactions over 4 months, each one large enough to hurt. Each one timed perfectly for when I was distracted or asleep or, as I would later understand, deliberately kept out of the room. I'm Dorothy. I'm 67 years old, a retired nurse of 31 years, and I raised my daughter Claire on my own after her father walked out when she was 9. I tell you that because I want you to understand who I was before any of this happened. I was not a confused old woman. I was not someone who misplaced things or forgot conversations. I had administered medications for 3 decades without a single error. I had memorized dosage charts, patient histories, allergy flags. My mind was the sharpest tool I owned, and I had kept it sharp on purpose because I knew better than most people what it looked like when a mind began to dull. So when my son-in-law Marcus first suggested, gently, over Sunday dinner, that maybe I should see someone about my memory, I laughed. I actually laughed. I said, "Marcus, I remembered your birthday last month when Claire forgot it." He smiled at that. He had a very good smile, Marcus did. That was the first thing I'd noticed about him when Claire brought him home 6 years ago, the smile that arrived just a half-second too quickly, like it had been rehearsed. I want to go back to the beginning so you understand how it built. These things never start with $43,000. They start much smaller than that. It started with the move. My house, the one I'd owned for 22 years, the one Claire grew up in, needed a new roof and new HVAC in the same summer, and the estimates came back so high they made me sit down. Marcus was the one who suggested I sell and move in with them. "You'd have your own suite, Mom," he said. He called me Mom from the very first Christmas, which I'd found charming at the time. "Your own entrance, your own bathroom, and you wouldn't be alone out here." Claire was beside him nodding, and she looked so genuinely hopeful that I pushed down the small, quiet resistance I felt and said yes. The suite was lovely. I won't take that away from them. It had a separate door that opened onto the backyard, a full bathroom, and a little sitting area where I kept my reading chair and my television. I contributed to the household expenses, which felt right to me. And for the first 6 months, things were fine. Quiet, a little formal, but fine. Marcus worked in financial consulting. He had clients I never met, and phone calls he took in the garage with the door closed, and Claire worked long hours at the dental office where she was the office manager, which meant she left at 7:30 most mornings and came home tired most evenings. During those hours, it was often just Marcus and me. And Marcus, I gradually learned, had opinions about how I managed my money. It started with suggestions. Had I thought about consolidating my accounts? My retirement savings were spread across 2 institutions, which was inefficient, he said. He knew a portfolio manager who could do better. I told him I was comfortable with my current arrangements. He nodded easily and dropped it. But he came back to it. He always came back to things, Marcus did, but he spaced it out so you didn't notice the repetition. 3 weeks later, a different angle. A month after that, a story about someone he knew who'd lost money because their savings weren't properly structured. Patient. He was extraordinarily patient. The first time I noticed money missing, I told myself I was wrong. It was $800 from my checking account, a withdrawal I had no memory of making. I went through my calendar, my receipts, my memory, and found nothing. I mentioned it to Claire and she looked at me with an expression I didn't like, not alarm, but something softer and more worrying than alarm. Careful, like she was choosing her words. "You probably just forgot, Mom. You've been tired lately." I hadn't been particularly tired, but I let it go because the alternative that something deliberate had happened was a thought I wasn't ready to sit with. 3 weeks later, $1,200, gone from the same account. This time I didn't say anything. I wrote it down instead, in a small notebook I kept in my reading chair. Date. Amount. I was a nurse for 31 years. We documented everything. The strange thing was how my body started to feel around that time. I want to be clear that I am not comparing my experience to what other people have suffered. But there is more than one way to make someone feel like they are disappearing. I started to feel foggy in the mornings in a way I never had before. Not sick, exactly, just slow. Like my thoughts were arriving through gauze. I'd always been a sharp morning person, up at 6, coffee made, crosswords started before 7. Suddenly I was waking at 8:30, feeling like I hadn't slept at all, moving through the first hours of the day like I was underwater. I noticed it happened most on mornings after I'd had the tea. Marcus had started making me tea. It was a small thing, an apparently kind thing. He'd bring a cup to my sitting room when I was reading in the evenings. Chamomile, he said, for sleep. I drank it because refusing felt rude, and because I genuinely didn't think, at that point, that I had any reason not to trust him. He was my daughter's husband. He called me Mom. He brought me tea. But I was a nurse, and nurses are trained to notice patterns even when they don't want to. The fog was worse on mornings after the tea. I tested it once, quietly, by pouring the tea into the small planter near my window while Marcus wasn't looking. The next morning I was fine. Sharp, clear. I stood in my bathroom looking at my own face in the mirror for a long moment, and I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Certain. I didn't confront him. I want you to understand why, because some of you will wonder. I didn't confront him because I had no proof, and because Marcus was smart, and because the account I would be making, a 67-year-old woman accusing her son-in-law of drugging her tea, was exactly the kind of account that gets dismissed. I had watched that happen in my career more times than I could count. Women my age, in situations of dependence, saying something is wrong, and being heard as confused. I would not be dismissed. If I was going to say something, I was going to say it with evidence in my hand. So I called my friend Loretta. Loretta and I have been friends since we were both 32 and working the night shift together in the cardiac unit. She is the most practical person I have ever known. When I told her what I'd noticed, the money, the fog, the tea, the timing, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Dorothy, what you need is a camera. Not you're imagining things. Not maybe you're just tired. Just, here is the solution." I have loved her for 35 years for exactly that quality. She drove over the next afternoon while Claire was at work, and Marcus, I'd confirmed, had a client meeting until 6. We put a small camera in the bookshelf of my sitting room, angled toward the door and the small table where I kept my evening things. It looked like a black charger plug. Loretta ordered it off the internet the night before, and it connected to an app on my phone. She also helped me set up a second one, and this is the part that mattered most in the kitchen. Tucked between the cookbooks on the upper shelf, pointed at the counter where Marcus made the tea. "You might see nothing," she said, pulling on her coat to leave. "I know," I said, "but if you see something, you call me before you do anything else. Promise me." I promised her. I stopped drinking the tea that evening. When Marcus brought it, I thanked him and set it on the side table and pretended to sip it while I read. He stayed a few minutes, made conversation about a home renovation show Claire had been watching, and then said goodnight. I sat very still after he left and listened to myself breathe. The first 3 nights, nothing unusual on the footage. Marcus made the tea, brought it over, straightforward. I began to doubt myself. This is what these situations do. The moment you try to verify your own perception, you start wondering if the perception itself is the problem. I lay awake the 4th night thinking, what if I am confused? What if Loretta and I had just put cameras in my daughter's house because I misread some bank statements? Then I watched the footage from the 5th night. He thought he was alone. Claire was at a book club she attended on the 2nd Thursday of every month, which Marcus knew, and I had mentioned at dinner that I was going to bed early because I had a headache. I watched him make the tea with my own face on a 4-inch screen at 1 o'clock in the morning. Watched him fill the kettle, set it to boil, and then casually, like a man who had done this many times, like a man with no reason to rush because he believed he was unobserved, open the cabinet above the refrigerator, the one I never used because it was too high to reach comfortably. He took out a small brown glass bottle. He added something to the cup. He stirred it, put the bottle back, and finished making the tea like nothing had happened. I watched it 4 times. I sat in my reading chair at 1 in the morning, watching my son-in-law drug my tea on a 4-inch screen, and what I felt was not the explosion of rage you might expect. It was something colder, something that had been a suspicion for weeks, and was now simply, irrevocably, a fact. I was not confused. I had never been confused. And Marcus, who had called me Mom and brought me chamomile tea and suggested very gently over Sunday dinners that maybe I should see someone about my memory. Marcus had been doing this deliberately, carefully, and for long enough that he had gotten comfortable. I called Loretta at 1:17 in the morning. She answered on the second ring, which is the kind of friend she is. "I have it," I said. "I have him on camera." She was at my door by 2 o'clock. We sat together and I showed her the footage, and then I showed her the notebook I'd been keeping every missing amount, every date, every morning I'd woken up foggy after the tea. She read through it without saying anything. When she was done, she looked up at me and said, "You need a lawyer before you need anything else." I had a lawyer by 9 the following morning. Her name was Patricia Holt, and she had been recommended by a former colleague of mine whose mother had gone through something similar, elder financial abuse, which is what Patricia called it when I laid out what I had, sitting across from her desk with my notebook and my phone, and 31 years of clinical documentation habits on my side. She looked at the footage, and she looked at the bank records I'd printed, and she asked me 2 or 3 precise, efficient questions, and then she said, "We're going to be all right." But before any of that process could unfold, there was the moment with Claire. I have thought about this more than any other part, how to tell my daughter that the man she loved and had built a life with had been drugging her mother and stealing from her. Claire was 41 years old, and she had worked so hard for the life she had, the house, the stability, the sense of security that had eluded her when she was a kid, and we were stretching every dollar. I had never wanted to be a burden to her. I had always, fiercely, wanted to be someone she could lean on rather than worry about, and now I was about to blow apart her household. I didn't tell her at home. I asked her to meet me for coffee at a place we used to go when she was in her 20s, a diner on Clement Street that had the same menu it had had for 40 years. I told her I needed to talk to her about something serious, and I needed her to hear me out before she said anything. She sat down across from me with her coffee and looked at me the way she used to look at me, before bad news, jaw tight, eyes steady. She had always been braver about receiving hard things than she let on. I laid it out. The money first, with the bank records in front of her. Then the footage, which I'd transferred to my tablet. I watched her watch her husband open that cabinet and add something to my tea, and I watched the color leave her face entirely, and I reached across the table and held her hand while she watched it, because there was nothing else to do. She didn't speak for almost 2 minutes after I stopped the video. Then she said, "How long?" "The bank records go back 5 months," I said. "The fog started around 4 months ago. I don't know how long before that." She pressed her hand over her mouth. Her eyes were full, but she didn't cry yet. She was still in the processing stage, still fitting the shape of what she'd just seen against the shape of the husband she thought she knew, and I could watch exactly when the 2 shapes refused to match. "Mom," she said, and then nothing else for another minute. "I have a lawyer," I said. "Patricia Holt. I need you to not go home tonight until I've talked to her again and we know what the next step is." "Where did he think the money was going?" Claire said, and her voice was very quiet. Was he planning to?" "I think so," I said. I didn't say it more plainly than that because I didn't need to. Claire was intelligent, and she filled in the rest of the sentence herself, that Marcus had apparently believed, or gambled, that a 67-year-old woman with a gradually fogged mind and a history of living alone would not be able to mount the kind of careful, documented, methodical resistance that it turned out she absolutely could mount. That evening, while Claire stayed with Loretta, Patricia contacted the police. I was the one who met them at the house, with the footage and the documentation and the bottle from the cabinet above the refrigerator, which tested positive for a sedative compound that had no business being in chamomile tea. I watched them take it away in an evidence bag, and I felt the particular exhaustion of someone who has been carrying something heavy for a very long time and has finally been allowed to set it down. Marcus was arrested 2 days later. I was not there for that. I was with Claire, who was navigating something I couldn't fully navigate for her, the specific grief of discovering that someone you loved was never quite the person you believed them to be. I sat with her, and I didn't tell her it would be fine quickly, because I knew better. I just sat with her. Sometimes that's the whole of what a mother can do. What came out in the subsequent weeks was worse than I had known and also, in a strange way, clarifying. Marcus had been skimming from my accounts using a power of attorney document I had no memory of signing because I hadn't signed it. The signature had been forged by someone with enough familiarity with my handwriting to make a passable attempt and with enough access to my documents to substitute pages. He had been moving money incrementally into an account Claire knew nothing about. The sedative in the tea, the attorney said, had likely been intended to slow my cognitive responses, increase my susceptibility to suggestion, and provide a foundation for an eventual argument that I lacked mental capacity. The kind of argument that, if it had succeeded, might have allowed him to assume broader control of my finances entirely. He had a plan. It was a patient plan, built on small steps, and it had depended on one central assumption, that I wouldn't notice, or that if I noticed, no one would believe me. He underestimated me. I want to say that plainly, not out of pride, but because I think it matters to say it. I was a woman in her late 60s, living in someone else's house, increasingly foggy from substances I hadn't consented to, watching my savings disappear, and I still noticed. I still documented. I still called my friend at 1 a.m. and sat across from my daughter in a diner on Clement Street and told her the truth, even when I knew it would break something. Marcus pled guilty to financial elder abuse, forgery, and unlawful administration of a controlled substance. He was sentenced to 9 years. I was in the courtroom when the sentence was read, and I watched him look at the floor, and the only thing I felt was tired. Not triumphant. Not relieved. Exactly. Just the specific, leaden tiredness of someone who spent months fighting a battle they should never have had to fight at all. Claire filed for divorce before the trial concluded. She moved into a smaller apartment, and I helped her paint it on a Saturday in November, the two of us in old clothes with rollers and a playlist she'd made, the way we used to do projects together when she was young, and it was just the two of us figuring things out. We didn't talk about Marcus much that day. We talked about the color she'd chosen for the bedroom wall, and about a restaurant she wanted to try, and about whether her fern was getting enough light. We talked like people who were still, despite everything, standing. I moved back into my own place. I rent now. The house I sold is someone else's house, but it suits me. I have a good lock on the door and a security camera I installed myself, because I know how to install them now, and a bookshelf full of mysteries I've been slowly working through since I retired. I have breakfast with Loretta on Wednesdays. I call Claire every Sunday. There are things I wish I had done differently, and I want to be honest about them because I think they might help someone reading this. I wish I had trusted my instincts sooner, not just about Marcus, but about the move itself. That quiet resistance I felt and suppressed when he first suggested I come live with them. It wasn't irrational. It wasn't confusion or stubbornness. It was the accumulated experience of 61 years of being a person in the world, telling me something was slightly wrong about the shape of what was being offered. I overrode it because I didn't want to seem ungrateful, or difficult, or old. I have thought about that a great deal. I also want to say this clearly to anyone who is older and living with family and starting to feel like the ground is shifting under you. You are allowed to document things. You are allowed to ask questions. You are allowed to call a friend at 1 a.m. You are allowed to be suspicious without having proof yet. You do not have to wait until you are certain before you start paying attention. Pay attention first. The certainty will follow. There are specific signs I missed too long that I want to name. Withdrawals I couldn't account for but talked myself out of investigating. Unusual tiredness that I attributed to age rather than cause. Small comments about my memory, delivered gently, regularly, by someone with an interest in my appearing less sharp than I was. Isolation from my own routines and spaces, so gradual I didn't notice it accumulating. If any of those sound familiar to you, please don't wait the way I waited. Write it down. Tell someone. Call someone like Loretta, who will not talk you out of your own perceptions. The morning after Marcus was sentenced, I woke up at 6 o'clock the way I always used to. The light was coming through the curtains in that pale early way it does in November, and I lay there for a moment, just listening to the building, the pipes, the neighbor's dog, the traffic starting up on the street below. My mind was clear. Completely clear, the way it had been before the tea, before the fog, before any of this, and I want to tell you that there is nothing in the world quite like that feeling. The feeling of your own mind working exactly as it should, unimpeded, sharp, yours. I got up and made coffee. I started the crossword. Outside, the city was doing what it always does, indifferent and alive, and I sat in my kitchen with my cup and my pen and thought, I am still here. I am still exactly who I was. Nobody managed to take that from me. And I plan to stay that way for a very long time.